Hey, fourth grade, Mr. Ditch here with an important alert. We've never had one of these before. That's right. Well, I'm actually recording this after I recorded all the rest of the other lesson because when I got done, I realized that I forgot to tell you something important. So here it is before you watch the rest of the lesson. We're going to look at about 4 different poems today, and I don't read all of them twice because they're some of them are a little bit longer, and I read them like with a nice rhythm and kind of like pretty quickly. So, what I wanted to tell you is if you feel like you want to reread them or hear them again, either just rewind the video and listen to me read it again, or just pause because they're all on the screen and you can reread them yourself. I hope that makes sense. Enjoy the rest of today's poetry lesson. Welcome back, my fourth grade poets, almost fifth grade poets. This is one of our very last ELA lessons of fourth grade. Either yay or but the good news is we'll have plenty more ELA lessons in fifth grade. All right, so anyway, what is today about? Today is about basking in poetry. So you've had a chance to write poetry, but now we're going to bask in poetry. What is basking? Well, basking looks like this. This woman is basking in the sun. She is just soaking it all in and then just enjoying it for its beauty and its warmth and for what it is. And poetry is an art form, so we can bask in it and just enjoy it for what it is. Okay, next. I'm going to shrink myself a little bit here. There we go. All right, so what is today's target then? It is, I can analyze the meaning of poems. Well, let's look at that a little bit closer. So we're talking about the meaning of poems. So obviously we're sticking with poetry. And meaning is like, what are they trying to say? What are they about? It's not just the meter, the rhythm, the rhyme, the alliteration, the repetition, right? What does it mean? And then analyze means to look closely at something. So we're going to look closely at the meaning of poems. And why are we going to analyze the meaning of poems? To bask in them. That's right. Poems can be read quickly and brushed aside, but that's not really basking in them. To really appreciate them, you need to look closer. So we're going to keep looking at some tools. You've learned a lot of the tools of poetry so far, but we're going to look at some ways to look closer at poetry, to really appreciate them and bask in them. Okay. Oh, what's that? Oh, you have a question? What are we going to be doing? Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. All right, so what are we going to be doing today? We're going to be looking at 4 different poems to bask in them. 2 of them by Shel Silverstein. A lot of you probably have heard of him. He's a very famous poet, sells a lot of books. Hint, you can make money writing poems. Think about all the people who write lyrics for songs. Yeah. Okay. But not that we would just write poems for the money, right? We would write them because they're a beautiful art form and we want to bask in them. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. That's what you can expect coming up, is looking at 4 different poems and ways to analyze their meaning. Thumbs up? All right. But first, let's talk about art again. That's right. Why? Because poetry is an art form. So let's look at this same painting we looked at before. Now, much like paintings, poetry takes some time to study it to really appreciate it. I might just say this painting was hanging in a hallway of a museum. I might look at it and just sort of move on, right? That's my choice. I can just look at it and move on, like, oh, there's a lady in the rain. But if I look closer and if I understand painting, then I will appreciate it even more. So some things to know about a painting is what kind of canvas did the artist use? What kind of brush did they use? What kind of paint did they use? Is this watercolor? Is it oil-based? Is it acrylic? I don't even know all this stuff about art. I know some of it. Like what techniques did they use? What style is it in? These are the things that people who study art, these are the things they think about. So I've already given you some of those tools with poetry: rhyme, rhythm, meter, repetition, alliteration, right? We've talked about some of those things. That's sort of like, what paint do you use? What colors do you use? What techniques do you use? How wide was your paintbrush? But if I really want to appreciate this piece of art, I might have to look closer. I have to understand all those things, but then I also have to look at the big idea of it. So I could look here, like if I know a lot about painting, I know that when I look at this, these reflections and the glistening sidewalk is kind of amazing to me. Um, the detail and the care that the artist must have taken to be able to paint reflections like that is really remarkable. Like, it's really a beautiful thing to bask in and wonder about. Like, it's really great technique, right? Um, but then I can back up too and say, okay, that's really great technique. They used a certain brush, they used certain colors, they used shadow and light. But then I can also think, like, well, what's the big idea of this painting? Getting past just the details. Well, it looks like it's trying to capture a moment on a rainy day in a city. That might connect with me really closely if I've been to a city, I've been in a scene like this. Maybe I'm pondering that woman. Who is she? She's certainly in the front, right? I might be thinking that guy that's coming in the middle, like, it almost looks like, is he coming to talk to her or help her? Does she maybe look sad or lonely? Like, these are things that I can only know by analyzing this painting. I also get a sense of, like, in the distance here, like, there's a lot of like taxi cabs and traffic, it looks like. And if you've ever been in a busy city, like, when I look back in the distance in this painting, I can almost like smell like the peanuts roasting in the hot dog carts in a busy city because the painting is so vivid. So when I look at it closer and I actually stop to analyze it and bask in it, I appreciate it much more than just walking by. Now, just like this painting with poetry, there's not necessarily one right answer. I might just think this poem is about loneliness, right? Because this woman looks lonely to me. Someone else might think this poem is about a celebration of rainy days, right? Someone else might think this poem's really about this guy and what is he going to do? Is he going to come up and ask her a question and help her? Is that her husband? Is it her son? Like, we don't know, right? So there's no right or wrong answer, but by having those conversations and analyzing it, we can take what at first seems like a very simple painting and get so much meaning out of it. So I hope that helps. Poetry is like that. Okay. So, basking in poetry. How can we continue to bask? Well, first, there's themes in poetry. Remember back in school we talked about themes, like themes of Wish Tree. Like, Wish Tree was a lot about kindness and friendship and about accepting people who are immigrants, about being kind to animals and nature. Those were the themes, the really big ideas, right? Well, poetry has themes. Poems require a lot of inferencing because the poet rarely just says all the words to tell us exactly what they're trying to say. So part of the fun, part of how we bask in poetry is we have to sort of figure it out. It's like a little puzzle. Much like this painting, like, I really have no idea what this painting is about. I don't know exactly what the painter was trying to communicate, but I can think about it and make inferences about it, right? Okay. We often have to think in poems, who is the speaker? Because they rarely tell us exactly who is saying what they're saying, and part of the puzzle is figuring out who the speaker is. And then so much of poetry is about how someone feels about something. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they amazed? Are they frustrated? Are they feeling sneaky or funny? And so we have to figure out how the speaker might feel. Those are some of the main ways to really understand a poem deeply. There's more, but this is what we're going to focus on today. All right, so now we're going to bask in themes. Remember, themes are those big ideas. One way to think about it is like, what was I supposed to learn? It's almost like the moral or the lesson, but it's like the big ideas of what it's about. So we are going to look at a Shel Silverstein poem and talk about what the theme of it is. It's a short little poem. I will read it, and then we'll talk about the theme. And as I'm reading it, think about the theme. Hug-o-war. I will not play at tug-o-war. I'd rather play at hug-o-war, where everyone hugs instead of tugs, where everyone giggles and rolls on the rug, where everyone kisses and everyone grins, and everyone cuddles and everyone wins. I'm going to read it one more time. I will not play at tug-o-war. I'd rather play at hug-o-war, where everyone hugs instead of tugs, where everyone giggles and rolls on the rug, where everyone kisses and everyone grins, and everyone cuddles and everyone wins. So we see a lot of things in there, right? So first we can just bask in its beauty and the rhyme and the rhythm of it, because it has a lot of rhyme and rhythm. We see tug-o-war, hug-o-war, hugs, tugs, grins, wins, right? Lots of, and even repetition, and everyone, and everyone, and everyone. So we can look at sort of like the details of it. That's one way to look at it. But let's think about the big idea of this thing. Well, it's comparing, it's saying what they would like to do. And it's describing all of these ways that people are kind to each other, right? Kissing, cuddling, grinning, hugging, and it's saying that they will not play at tug-of-war. Well, what's tug-of-war? It's like when you're arguing, you're battling, you're fighting, there's conflict, right? So I think the theme of this is, think about it, I think the theme is just be nice to each other, right? It's a very simple but very powerful little poem about just let's be nice to each other. So that's what it means by theme. Did it ever say right in the poem, be nice? No, it didn't. But would Shel Silverstein have made a good point by just saying be nice to each other? Not really. He's trying to describe a world that is kinder through poetry. Okay. So we kind of had to infer that theme because he never says the theme of this poem is be nice to each other. But he's talking about doing these kind things instead of having conflict. Pretty smart guy. All right. So one of the fun things to do to bask in poetry is to try to figure out the speaker. So I'm going to read a poem. If you were with me in last week's ELA group, I've already read it to you. And we're going to try to figure out who is actually speaking. It's kind of like a fun little game. It's like a mystery. So I just have to shrink my screen, and then I will be back with a poem where we can figure out who is actually doing the talking. All right, we have found the poem where we're going to try to figure out who the speaker is. So that's what you're thinking about as I'm reading. I'm only going to read it through once, but be thinking about who is speaking. I've been in this school many times before, but never this particular class. Sometimes finding your way is as murky as mud. Sometimes it's clearer than glass. Best case, the plans are waiting for me, right there on the top of the desk. But this time I have to dig like a pirate on a hunt for a treasure chest. In the right drawers I find nothing but food, for the class rabbit that hops on the carpet. In the left I find nothing but unsharpened pencils, but strangely enough, no sharpener. I write my name on the board and then I ask them, the question that never gets a straight answer. What have you lately been working on in your lessons with Mrs. Johansson? One student says it's been fractions, another says it's the volume of cones, and a third says complex equations, and a fourth says Shakespeare poems. Some days are easier than others for sure, but if help doesn't come when I ask, I'll just have them take out their homework so I can at least see if it's poetry or math. All right, so think about that. Who was speaking? And think about what evidence or clues in the poem tell us. So going from our small group, I remember that a bunch of students at first were like, well, it's in a school, right? I mean, it says very first, I've been in this school many times before. And so maybe it's a student. But then you're like, well, no, it's not a student because it says they're asking the students, right? So then maybe it's a teacher. So we talked about that in small group. Well, maybe it's a teacher. And it probably is, right? Because this person is asking them what they've been working on lately. But there's some clues that it's a certain type of teacher. And if we think about it, this is actually a guest teacher or a substitute teacher, right? And let's look at the clues. So the teacher gets to school. They've been to the school before, but they've never been in this class. So you know it's not their regular teacher, right? It's saying the plans are waiting for me. Well, substitutes have to get plans from the regular teacher to know what to teach that day. But it looks like what happened on this day is there were no plans. So the teacher had to ask the students, hey, what have you all been working on lately? And it seems like the students didn't really give a very straight answer. So the substitute teacher is kind of like, uh-oh, right? And at the end, she says something like, well, some days are either easier than others, and I guess if I don't really have any plans, I'll just have them take out their homework and just make it up as I go along. So this poem makes a lot more sense, and it's actually pretty funny when you realize that this is a substitute teacher having a bad day. So trying to figure out who the speaker was helps us understand the poem better. Notice it never says in here, this poem is written by a substitute teacher, or I am the substitute teacher. Sort of the fun of it, the basking in it, the enjoyment of it, comes from figuring out that it was a substitute talking. I hope that makes sense. All right, so we just figured out how to infer the speaker, but we also often have to infer the speaker's feelings because poems need to be figured out. The poet rarely just comes out and says what exact feelings the speaker is having. So let's look at another example from Shel Silverstein. I'm going to read it. It's called For Sale. One sister for sale, one sister for sale, one crying and spying young sister for sale. I'm really not kidding, so who'll start the bidding? Do I hear $1, a nickel, a penny? Oh, isn't there any one kid who will buy this old sister for sale, this crying and spying young sister for sale? How many of you have felt like that? If you have a sibling, I'm sure you can relate. So first, let's figure out who the speaker is. I don't think the speaker is just the auctioneer or the salesperson here, right? I think that salesperson is this girl's either big brother or big sister. Maybe big brother based on the picture there. It sounds like this is our question. What are the speaker's feelings? Does it say in the poem? Not really. It never says how the person trying to sell their sister is feeling, but we can make an inference, right? From our own experiences, because we might have all been frustrated with a sibling once or twice, and probably been so frustrated that we'd be willing to sell them. Now, you might just be selling your sibling for money, but most likely you're selling them because the two of you aren't getting along, and it says crying and spying, so maybe your sister was crying, driving you crazy, was spying on you. So this is kind of like a sibling rivalry, right? And that older sibling is like, I would sell my little sis right now and be done with her. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. Part of poetry, right, is just not making it so obvious, making the reader have to do the work to figure out the way the speaker of the poem is feeling. All right, we're going to put it all together now with a little more help from Mr. Shel Silverstein. So we're going to look at one of his most famous poems, and we're going to think about theme, the speaker, how they're feeling, and all of it. So let me just get out of here and go to that poem right here. Okay, this is one called Sick. So as I'm reading, think about all those things. Theme, speaker, speaker's feelings, what is the author trying to tell us, that kind of thing. Sick. I cannot go to school today, said little Peggy Ann McKay. I have the measles and the mumps, a gash, a rash, and purple bumps. My mouth is wet, my throat is dry. I'm going blind in my right eye. My tonsils are as big as rocks. I've counted 16 chicken pox. And there's one more, that's 17. And don't you think my face looks green? My leg is cut, my eyes are blue. It might be instamatic flu. I cough and sneeze and gasp and choke. I'm sure that my left leg is broke. My hip hurts when I move my chin. My belly button's caving in. My back is wrenched, my ankle's sprained. My appendix pains each time it rains. My nose is cold, my toes are numb. I have a sliver in my thumb. My neck is stiff, my voice is weak. I hardly whisper when I speak. My tongue is filling up my mouth. I think my hair is falling out. My elbow's bent, my spine ain't straight, my temperature is 108. My brain is shrunk, I cannot hear. There is a hole inside my ear. I have a hangnail, and my heart is what? What's that you say? You say today is Saturday? Goodbye, I'm going out to play. I love that poem, and we can all relate to that, right? Let's go back. All right, so we're going to put it all together now. Yes, we won't just be analyzing Sick by Shel Silverstein. We will be basking in it. So first, like we do when we look at a painting, we just bask in the beauty. It's funny. It's just all these things that are going wrong. Oh, I have instamatic flu. I have a fever of 108. It has this great rhythm to it. The speaker has so much voice, and it's just fun to listen to. So even before we've analyzed it at all, we just sort of appreciate the language of it. So let's recognize some of the tools that were used. Was there meter? Was there rhythm? Was there rhyme? Any of those things we talked about. Was there repetition? Let's go back really quick to it and see. Well, there's definitely repetition. My hip hurts, my belly, my back, my appendix, my nose, my, right? So lots of repetition. At the end, the little twist ending, which by the way is a tool that poets use, is having like a surprise ending. A lot of poems have that. What's that? What's that you say? You say today is Saturday. Goodbye, I'm going out to play. Well, that's rhyme, right? And there's definitely a ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba kind of rhythm to this. Blew and flew, choke and broke, all sorts of rhyme, rhythm, repetition, surprise ending. This poet used a lot of the tricks, so we can appreciate those things now that we understand them better. Just gonna leave it up like this. And can we infer the speaker? Can we infer the speaker? Well, there's a picture which helps, right? It seems like it's a little girl laying in bed. But what about this little girl? Is it the middle of summer? Probably not. So we can make another inference. This is probably a girl on a school day, right? She or she thinks it's a school day. And we can infer how she feels. How is she really feeling? Well, she says she's feeling super sick, right? But do you think she's really feeling sick? Well, no, because at the surprise ending, she's like, oh, it's Saturday? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm going to go play, right? So she's probably feeling like she doesn't want to go to school and like she's going to pretend to play sick, which is something we can all relate to and is kind of silly and fun. And Shel Silverstein kind of poked fun at all of us, or any of us, not that you've ever done this, that is fake sick just to get to stay home from something you don't feel like doing, right? So she doesn't really feel sick, even though most of the poem says she does. We have to infer that she was actually perfectly healthy, but didn't want to go to school that day. Any other inferences? Well, like I said, we can infer that it was school that she didn't want to go to. We can infer that she's fine. She never says she's fine. In fact, all she says is how sick she is, but we made an inference that she's fine. All of that helps us bask and appreciate some of the themes. Like, what are some of the big ideas? Well, I kind of talked about it before, but some of the big ideas of this poem are what? Well, that we all play sick sometimes. We all get nervous about going to something we don't want to do. That sometimes we're not always that truthful. Sometimes we get caught when we try to tell a lie. Imagine if you played sick just so like that person did, and just like you really laid it on thick to mom and dad. Oh, I'm sick, I have instamatic flu, I have 108 fever, I don't feel good, I can't go. And then they're like, it's Saturday, and you're like, oh shoot, I'm busted. Like, I either have to keep playing sick or I have to admit that I'm lying. So those are some of the themes, right? That like, don't lie because you might get busted, and maybe you're nervous about school, but not really a good idea to play sick. Kind of themes, lessons we're supposed to learn. We put it all together to Bask in Sick by Shel Silverstein. So, what are your directions? Well, In the last 2 lessons, you have written poems. And for today, you're going to read some and answer some questions about inferences and themes and who's the speaker and that sort of thing. So, yeah, all you're going to do is go in and do the exit ticket, and there'll be a couple poems in there we'll ask some questions about. And remember, this target is I can analyze, no wait, bask in the meaning of poems. So that's why we're doing this, is to help you appreciate poetry even more. Just like looking at a painting. The longer you look, the more questions you ask, the more you wonder about it, the more you try to understand it, you actually get more meaning out of it. I hope that makes sense. Please email with any questions. Enjoy the poems that I post. There's a couple more coming from Shel Silverstein if you like those. And that's it. Goodbye, 4th, almost 5th grade poets. Have a wonderful day.